We were working with all the SROs in Richland County to introduce them to the model of crisis intervention that we teach to staff in our schools. And the purpose of that is to really teach some skills and some tools to folks so that when they're faced with difficult student behaviors, that they're able to assess the level of difficulty the students are presenting with and have an appropriate staff reaction that will allow them to de-escalate a potentially difficult situation instead of escalating it unnecessarily. The other part of the workshop today was really to introduce them to some disability awareness so that they understand some of the disabilities and learning differences that a lot of the children that they work with in schools are facing and struggling with. Because a lot of times just having that knowledge is really helpful in making good choices about how to intervene with difficult behaviors. We introduced like a classroom model for understanding crisis behavior that goes through the type of escalation continuum most people work through as they become more and more aggravated or their behavior revs up. And then we talked about the appropriate staff responses at each of those levels. So we talk about when students are showing anxiety, for example, how do you respond? You respond, for example, by being supportive and providing a supportive response. And then we talk with them about what we call the verbal escalation continuum, which is really where students start to use words to communicate how they're feeling and what their needs are. And they may become a little more verbally non-compliant or verbally aggressive, and how staff can respond to that, for example, by setting limits and staying calm. We talk about how to do that, how to not take things personally so that they can provide a positive response to students when students are being perhaps verbally aggressive. And then we talk about students who become physically violent or they physically act out. Now, we didn't teach the SROs any type of physical restraint. They have their own way of doing that. We do teach staff in our schools how to do that, how to do nonviolent physical crisis intervention. So we did not do those models with them today, but we did introduce them to when we would do that in the schools. In the schools, we really only do that as a last resort or when somebody is in imminent danger to self or others. And then we talked to them about what you do after a crisis, postvention, and how you use the crisis as a learning opportunity to help them gain skills so that they don't engage in those same behaviors again. So we go through each of those different levels and break it down to provide them some specific techniques and tools that they can use at every level to help respond to a crisis in a proactive or a positive way. I think it's of utmost importance. It's really powerful that we understand each other's perspective, because we do come with different perspectives and we come with different trainings and different backgrounds and experiences. And the more we understand each other's perspective, better able we are to work together as a team. So it helps for them to go through the same training that we go through in the schools, so that when they understand why we're doing what we're doing and the reasons we're making the decisions that we are, and they're familiar with the vocabulary that we're using, so that it helps them understand the why of what we're doing. But it also helps us to understand their perspective so that we understand the kinds of questions that they have about our policies and procedures in schools and the way we work with kids. But the more that we really have that common vocabulary, that we have a common set of tools, the better able we are to work together. And they have a lot of questions. I've worked with SROs for years that have asked to be able to participate in the training we do. Not necessarily because we're telling them that they have to use the skills that we're teaching, but so that they're familiar with what we do and understand why we're doing it, and that itself is a very powerful tool. They were very engaged. They participated great. They asked some really tough questions, but important questions. So they wanted to know things like when is appropriate for them to step in, what roles do they serve as members of our school teams, you know, why we don't restrain more often than we do. When do we consider it to be appropriate to restrain, and what's our reasoning for that? So, I mean, some of those questions, there's not easy, clear-cut answers. There's not always a black and white answer for these things, which can be frustrating for some people because they want a clear set of procedures and guidelines. But really through the training, what we're trying to do is give people tools and knowledge so that in the moment they can make the best judgment call they can, so that we keep everybody safe and that the experiences become learning experiences. And that's kind of, I think, one of the messages that we were trying to convey, is that that's really our focus in schools, is keeping everybody safe and making sure that kids are able to stay in school and have optimal access to the learning environment. And of course keeping staff safe too. We have an obligation for that, and there were some questions around the impact that difficult student behaviors have on other students. So if you have somebody engaging in difficult behavior, how does that impact the witnesses, the student witnesses, as well as the staff that are around? And of course we have an obligation to keep everybody else safe as well. The preliminary feedback we got was great. I think hopefully they understand our perspective a little bit better. They understand disabilities and differences that students present with a little bit better, and with that knowledge, hopefully that'll make them a little more confident and comfortable when they're dealing with students that have those difficulties in school. The questions they asked really let me know that this is of a lot of importance to them, that they were taking this very seriously, that they were really seeking to understand. They were very participatory and very engaged. They seemed to be having a lot of fun, and so if anything, we did some team building with them to bring them on as part of our team. But I hope, and as I told them, I'm not looking, or we weren't looking, to tell them that they need to do things differently or tell them that they needed a different perspective. But I did hope that some of the things that they took away today would mesh well with their training, but also that they might take some things away that they could build on what they already know and what they're already doing that would help them to feel even more confident and competent working with our students in the schools.